Hello and welcome to Retech, and today we're going to definitively cover, well, in my mind and from my point of view anyway, whether retrobrighting's actually worth doing. Is it worth doing it over the short term or the long term, or is it just worth doing at all? There's been a lot of controversy about retrobrighting and the way that it may or may not affect plastics. There's been a few studies into it, basically stating that the free radicals or the change within the plastics using Retrobright basically has a detrimental effect on the plastics themselves. And I kind of agree with that for most cases, but there's also a case use for Retrobright. But again, it depends on whether you want the machines to last a long time or whether you want them just to look good, maybe for a video shoot, or taking them to a museum or a display or a retro day or something similar to that. So let's have a little bit of a dive into each machine that I'm going to show you now. And basically each one of these machines were either repaired, rebuilt, cleaned, refurbished or retrobrighted a few years ago. We're talking 2 to 3 years ago now, and we just want to see how they've fared within that time and to give people a good idea of whether or not they're a better alternative. So let's have a quick look. So the first machine we have here is the Tandy Color Computer 2 or the TRS-80 Coco 2, depending on which market you're in. They were either marketed as Tandy or Radio Shack, depending on which side of the world you were on. And this is one that I've had for quite some time, and I think I did the work on this over 2 years ago. And basically, as you can see from the still pictures here, that the machine is in remarkable condition. It's very, very good. It hasn't yellowed. It hasn't gone back to this scruffy kind of pock-marked and cable-marked machine that this was originally, because it had marks from the cable where it had been stored, and it was also very grubby and very kind of off color. Now, the way this machine was restored is by using nothing more than gentle sanding. So we'll have a quick clip here just to show you how it was done. Now this is what we're using. It's the ultra-fine sanding sponge. It's for paintwork on one side and it's fine on the other, and it's mainly used for refinishing, and it's light enough to sand along the machine just like this. Don't put any pressure on it, just be very gentle with it, and it'll start bringing the colour up and also taking out some of those dents and nicks as you go. You don't have to force it. It will do it naturally if you just don't press on it too hard. Remember, the sponge has to have a little bit of moisture on it, otherwise it will dig in. Same with this mark here. You're just going to just gently sand it out without trying to remove the texture on the plastic surface itself. And you see, you just take your time, very light circles, and that's how you do it all around the machine. Now, just to make sure that you can see every little aspect of this machine, we're going to do a little bit of a close-up on the machine now. Okay, so as you can see from the camera here, you can see that it's very white, very clean, and we're just going to zoom in a little bit. Okay, so as you can see from the camera here, it's very white, very clean, and if we zoom in, you can see that it hasn't lost any of its color. And we'll go right into the case and the keyboard, and you can see that it's very, very bright. Now this has retained its color absolutely fantastically, and it's one of those machines that has just stayed completely bright, and there was no Retrobright used on this machine whatsoever. So there's just one option of what you can do with retrobrighting, or bringing the color back rather, of the machines. So let's just pull out another machine and then see how this next one fares. Right, so the next one on my list is the Atari 65 XE. It's one of my favorite 8-bit machines, not because it was amazing for its graphics and sound at the time when the Commodore 64 and other machines were out there, but because it was just amazing for its time. Remember, the 65XE was based on the 400 and 800, which were out years before the Commodore 64, and that's mainly because the graphics were on par with, and in some cases better. Now, a lot of Commodore 64 fans and maybe not agree with me on that one, but you've got to remember, when this machine was out, it was so early in the market, and it had dedicated processors and dedicated chips for sound and video and graphics, that it was really the first multimedia computer of its type. So anyway, we'll come back to that a little bit later, because I'm going to do a little bit more on the Atari range. But we've got the 65XE, and apart from being one of my favorite machines, it's also one of my favoritely styled machines. It's very, very nice in the way it's styled. But we're going to look at the case now. As you can see, the case on here, we'll do some close-ups again in a moment, is very, very nice. It's very bright. It hasn't changed color, and if you look all the way around the case, it is all one color. And the only difference is the keyboard. Now, on this machine, it was done in two parts. Now, the case was gently flat sanded to bring the color up to its original hue of kind of light gray, but the keys were very, very yellowed, and they were retrobrighted. Now, this machine's been stored in some very nice conditions, so we'll just take a very close look at it, and then you can decide whether or not it's worth going down the retrobrighting route or the color sanding route. And I'll talk you through what was done on it, and we'll now see how it actually looks on the close-up. Okay, so we have the 65XE here. It doesn't look too bad. It looks really nice. The case is very bright. It's very original looking on its colours, and it has some fading, but the fading itself isn't drastic. It's kind of yellowed in a few places, and it's only yellowed where it was massively yellowed before I retrobrighted the keyboard. Now, bear in mind, the case, as you can see here, has not been retrobrighted, and it stayed exactly how it was originally left once it was cleaned up and flat sanded back. Now, this case has stayed amazingly good. The keys, however, have started to come back through yellow, as you can see. I mean, you're looking at 2 years ago. Now, there's the overall machine, and if we zoom in on some of the keys, you can see they're not quite the correct colour, especially the function keys on the back. You have darker keys compared to the original looking keys that the machine should have been. But anyway, this is the 65XE. It's fared very well. The case has fared better than the keyboard, so retrobrighting's actually not fared very well over the 2.5 to maybe 3 years that this machine was done. I think it's about 2.5 years ago now. But the overall, the case is remarkably good. As you can see from that, it hasn't fared too badly. I think if you really wanted to bring the keys back up to the nice kind of white or very pale cream colour, then you would need to literally retrobright them again for another 5-6 hours or so, or maybe longer, to bring them to their true potential. But you can kind of get away with doing that with keys because the plastics seem to be more resilient. But I'm not sure how much, you know, you can keep taking these machines apart before you damage the actual keys themselves underneath the keycaps, where you actually press them into place. How long it will be before, when you press the keys, they start popping off. But also how long you can keep retrobrighting them before the damage to the plastics is irreversible. And if you have a look at this video here, this is how irreversible the damage can be to plastics on these machines. So cue the chocolate apple. Well, it powers on, it does what it should do, and you know, for all intents and purposes, it's a good machine, but it is unusable. It is completely unusable. It's unsafe. It's unsafe to use. It's unsafe to power on. It's unsafe to even have it anywhere plugged into the mains. And the reason is because of degradation of the plastics. Now, this machine's gone very yellow in comparison to what it should be, and as it's gone yellow, it's become brittle. And how brittle is exactly what I'm going to show you now. So as I move in, you see this piece here, no pressure. See this piece here, no pressure. No pressure. This is how brittle this machine has got. And that's not the only Apple machine that I have that's doing this. I've got another Apple all-in-one desktop, and it's doing exactly the same. It's literally crumbling. I can't pick the machine up anymore because the case flexes and the grills at the top, they just disintegrate. And if I put that through retrobrighting, that thing would just disintegrate. It would be a pool of broken plastic in the bottom of the tub. So I've got to now find a way of preserving that machine and making sure that it doesn't crack anymore. And that's going to be a tough one because the plastics have completely started to break down into powder on this machine. So yeah, that's going to be a difficult one to do, and that's something I'm going to look into in the future for these videos. Now, so far we've seen that sanding the cases is a good idea. Oh, it seems to be if you do it very, very gently. But that's only if you do it with a sense of, I can't really take this too far because I'm going to damage the actual patina on the case, the actual physical marbling that they may have put on the case, etc. So you've got to be very, very careful of that. But it seems to me that once you do that, you seem to have gotten away with or gotten rid of the actual yellowing, which is caused most certainly by the bromine in the case, because it's coming through to the top layer. Now, I've got machines that have gone yellow all the way through. I mean, right the way through the case, and there's no amount of flat sanding going to deal with that. So I've done it in a very different way. I've used color matching, and here's a video of me color matching an Atari ST, or a clip. So we've got this Atari ST here. This machine has been painted. It's been sanded and painted. It hasn't been sanded to take the texture off the case, but it's just been sanded to get rid of as much of the surface discoloration and the surface chemicals that come through the bromining process when they add it to these cases for fire retarding. And it was painted, this must be 3 years ago now, because this is one of the early models of the recreated machines that I did, and as you can see, the colors stayed really good all the way through the case. Now, the underneath wasn't painted, it was just left because, you know, very little gets to the underneath side of the case, but I just color matched it in so it all looks exactly the same. And now this has stayed really nice. Now, this is one of my early recreations using modern hardware of an Atari ST inside, but the process is exactly the same for the case. Now, the keyboard hasn't been touched. The keyboard was one of my nicer Atari ST keyboards. Now, all I've done is I made sure that these are stored away from direct heat. They're stored in a relatively cool place, and that seems to have literally retarded the color change on these machines. So it stopped the advance of the bromine coming through as quickly. Again, we'll take a quick close-up of this machine and we'll see exactly how it fares. Okay, so here's the Atari ST. As you can see here, it's very nice condition. I've just got a studio light on it in the back and a small one, as with all of these, just slightly to the left of it to try and get rid of any shadow effect, so you can see this thing the way it should be seen. And as you can see, it's very nice looking, and it's very clean looking. So if we slowly pan in and zoom in again, you can see after nearly 3 years this machine is in amazing condition. And the keyboard as well, it's very bright, and although it has degraded a little bit since it was built originally, it's not in bad condition overall. But the work done to the case to make it like this and to preserve the case and to keep it together has literally lasted, and it stood the test of time so far. So again, here's another way of actually trying to preserve your machines. So next up is my Commodore 128, and this machine here I've had for quite some time. Again, it's over 3 years. It was basically two-part again. It was horrible condition when I bought it. The case was awful. It was full of marks. It was unable to be retrobrighted if you wanted to, because it had cable marks in it where it had been wrapped around the machine and polystyrene burn in it, etc. So I decided to just flat sand it and bring it back to the color that I intended to have it, or as close as possible, or as close to the factory as possible. And as you can see here, it's fared very well again. I mean, in both sides, all the way around, it's pretty much the right color. But the keyboard when I bought this machine was literally horrible. It would gone to that orangey color, and there was no real amount of retrobrighting that I could have done to this, and it wouldn't have made any difference even if I'd retrobrighted this, because some of the orange that you could see bleeding through the keyboard originally had literally gone right through the key. So I had to do something with it. So what I did with that machine is I heavily sanded the case. These don't have any real kind of mottling on the case themselves or any real pattern in the plastic, so you can get away with being a little bit more heavy on the sanding side of it. And then once you've done that, you've got a nice case that hopefully the color won't come back through again, or the damage. And this hasn't. I got rid of a lot of the top surface of this case through gentle sanding, and you're talking probably not even a 1/4 of a millimeter of plastic substance that was on the top of this case itself. So it hasn't come back through. But the keys, on the other hand, have started to turn their deep yellow again. So really my only option with this is, because I like the machine, is to look around and see if I can get hold of another keyboard, and hopefully a nicer keyboard, because there's no way I'm ever going to stop this. And again, you've got to think, how long is it going to be before you cannot clean or bleach or retrobright these keys? Now, there's very little options you've got with keys. Now, unless you're happy to live with it and just to keep the structural rigidity of the keys in order, rather than just keep on taking some of that strength out of them by adding more and more chemicals to them every few years, then fine, just live with it, because this is the color these machines are going to go. I've got lots of machines that I haven't retrobrighted and I've just left as is, and because they're stored in a relatively cool environment, it hasn't got any worse. And I can do side-by-side comparisons through photographs, and they just don't get any worse. So I think retrobrighting has its place. I think retrobrighting does come in handy for small items like keys, etc. I don't think retrobrighting is going to be much of a long-term fix for the cases. I don't think retrobrighting is going to be much of a long-term fix for rigidity overall. But I do think that, you know, both systems have their place, because at the end of the day there's only so much you can do to keep these machines in one piece. Now, if it was all possible and we were able to do it to every machine, then I think the painting and clear coating maybe, but the painting side of it with acrylic style paints are going to be the best way forward. They're hardware and they're durable, they keep the oxygen out, they keep everything out of the case, so the actual surface underneath the paint doesn't get attacked by anything. It's the paint layer that's doing all of the hard work, and I think that's possibly the only way we're going to really preserve these machines for an extended period of time. Now, there are other machines out there that don't seem to be affected by the color degradation process, and one of them is the TRS 80 Model 1s, Model 2s, etc., with their silver painted coating, including the early color computer. The others are the black machines, such as the ZX Spectrums, ZX81s, even down to the Auric Atmos. I was just looking at one on the shelf there. There's an Auric Atmos, and the orange stroke red keys only seem to very slightly fade through time. So they seem to be much better in the way they were put together. I believe it's down to the colouring in the cases, and also I kind of think that some of these manufacturers forgot about adding the fire retardant to their materials, and I think that's why they fare a lot better. Now, the worst offenders seem to be Apple computers of the kind of early 90s era to the mid 90s era. They seem to fall apart after a few decades. I'm not so sure if they used a very poor quality plastic, or they put too much of the old fire retardant in, which has basically killed the cases. But they do fall apart, and they are awful. Every Apple computer of that age, apart from the eMacs, they tend to stay really, really good. They have a completely different philosophy on their case design. They have a clear plastic coating over the top, which seems to protect them very, very well. And I'm also guessing the later iMacs with the CRT and the nice colors you could buy are very similar, but I've seen a few of those that are actually starting to just craze and fall apart. So it seems to be affecting those machines longer term. Now, my conclusion, and based on my experience, is if you can seal out the elements and get the correct color, or as close as possible, then do that. That will work 100%. Make sure it's an acrylic based paint, because it won't affect the plastics, and give it a quick dust coat of plastic primer so you get a really good adhesion to the plastics as well. The next option is to color sand, and that works on a lot of machines. It doesn't work so much on cases for the BBC Micro with that kind of knobbled erased plastic. It won't work on other machines which have a very similar kind of pattern in the plastic or texture in the plastic, but it does work on the smoother materials, such as the Atari machines. It works on TRS 80, the white computer 2s, etc., the color computers, and it will probably work on things like the Auric 1, etc. So you're going to have a little bit of play there with how you're going to do it. So you've got some options, and I hope this video has been of interest. I've put together everything I've learned over the last 3 years into a kind of a very all-in-one video, so you can have a look and see the outcome rather than just the initial painting, sanding and retrobrighting. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this. Thanks for watching. I hope it's given you some ideas and food for thought on how you're going to go with your machines and how you're going to basically keep them a little bit longer term. Okay, so thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.